This is another PowerPoint Bible study, and this is on Sarah, the mother of nations. Genesis chapter 17, verse 16. Now the name Sarah, or Sarai, Sarah is princess. Originally, Sarai was the name of Abram's wife, and her name was changed from Sarai to Sarah in Genesis 17, verse 15. Now, when there's a name change, it's because something significant is happening, such as Saul of Tarsus to Paul the Apostle. So according to John Phillips in his book Exploring Genesis, the name Sarai meant my princess. The name Sarah meant a princess. So it's going from sort of a personal dimension to Abram to the world. From my princess to a princess. Now Abram, his name will originally become Abraham. So we look at his name. Abram meant high father. Abraham meant a father of many nations. So the name change occurs in Genesis chapter 17. And of course, God promised a son to Abram and Sarai. Now, Sarai was a beautiful woman, and Abram said to Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. Abram had a fear the Egyptians would kill him to get his beautiful wife. So his plan was to pass Sarai off as his sister while in Egypt. Yes, deception even occurs among God's people and God's leaders. So do you agree with Abram's plan to pass off Sarai as his sister? Why or why not? Well, obviously, you should disagree because it's lying, and the devil is the father of lies. So Abram told a half-truth. Sarai was truly his half-sister that became his wife. Now Sarai is the daughter of Abram's father, but not his mother. So besides, she is really my sister in that sense, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife. Abraham will say this to Abimelech, and trying to clear himself up of this deception in Genesis 20, verse 12. Sarai's beauty is noticed by the Egyptians, and when Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that she was a very beautiful woman in Genesis 12:14, and she was approximately 64 years of age when this statement was made. So I'm not sure what age you are watching this, and I'm not sure if you're male or female, but if you're female and you are anywhere near the age of 64, this was quite a compliment. She was so beautiful, Sarai was taken from Abram into the palace of Pharaoh. She was taken to be part of Pharaoh's harem. But the Lord inflicted diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife, Sarai. Genesis 12:17. Now, please don't get this wrong. And it needs to be presented in such a fashion, in such a way that not all disease that comes to an individual is a product of some type of sin. Let me say that again. Not all disease is a product of some type of sin. Disease just exists because of the fall of Adam. However, but there are times when certain diseases come in relationship to sin. Now we have to be really careful on this because of the book of Job. Job was a righteous man, and he was afflicted with diseases and tragedies, and yet he was a righteous man. It wasn't he was being punished by God. You also have to be aware of the conversation Jesus had about the man born blind, that it wasn't his sin or his parents' sin, but we do have some places in Scripture to show that sometimes disease happens because the individual is indulging in sin. God intended Abram to be a blessing to all nations, Genesis 12, verses 1 and 2, and yet in Egypt with Pharaoh, Abram and his wife are not a blessing. Rather, they bring a curse. Well, again, he went down there with some aspect of deception, so the curse comes out of deception. Now, a son is necessary to pass on the blessings that were promised, but Abram asked God about a son even when his wife is barren. But God promised a son coming from your own body will be your heir, Genesis 15:4. The promise of a son is affirmed again in Genesis 17. I will bless her, meaning Sarai, and give her a son, Genesis 17, verse 15. But Sarah and Abraham find this funny. Will a son be born to a man 100 years of age? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? Genesis 17:17. So sometimes there definitely is humor in God's promises and what God is planning to do and God does do in a person's life. It's called the laugh of unbelief. Abraham and Sarah both laughed at the promise of God. In both cases, their laugh was that of unbelief. Now, Dr. Ockengay, Harold J. Ockengay, will cut it the way it should be cut, and he is saying that laughing in this manner was showing their unbelief. They're saying, God, you're ridiculous. This laughter in Sarah was not that of an unbeliever. It was that of a believer who did not trust a particular divine promise. So he wants to clarify it, that they're both still believers, but they just don't believe God can do this. Maybe that typifies you and typifies me, that many times we don't really think God can do that for us. Her laughter was not that of mockery, but it was one of a single act of unbelief in the life of a believing person. So here you have both side by side, unbelief and yet belief. So is it possible for a believer in Jesus Christ to not believe all the promises of God? Sure. Sarah laughs again in Genesis 18. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I'm worn out while my master is old, will I have this pleasure? Laughter is rebuked. Read Genesis 18, verses 13 to 15. Why do you think Sarah denied the fact that she laughed? In other words, she's going to deny it. Now, the name Isaac means laughter. So God is going to bring about a pun on this whole thing, that the name of the child you bear, his name is laughter. The reason for the name is provided. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. So, I don't know if we are to laugh and be extremely giddy about this, or if we are to be weeping in the sense they didn't believe, or maybe both. They're caught. They're caught in the fact that they are true believers, but yet they can't believe far enough and realize that God has the great power to give her a child even at her age of 90. Now Sarah was barren, she had no children, Genesis 11:30, and barrenness was considered embarrassment and reproach and even a punishment from God. The great desire of a married woman in the days of Old Testament was to have a husband and a descendant. The descendant was male, not female. Yes, it was patriarchal. I know that. I won't get into any kind of rant and raving about the great impact of feminism and its terrible destruction that it's had upon the church as well as upon our land. Sarah could not give her husband a descendant to inherit the promises of God. The reproach attached to barrenness among the Hebrews was due to the constant expectation of the Messiah and the hope cherished by every woman that she might be the mother of the promised seed. Now that's something to think about. Could it be me? And you know that song, Mary, Did You Know? Mary, did you know that your baby boy? We just had a session with the author of the words of that song, who was with the Bill Gaither trio for some time, the comedian. He wrote the lyrics to the song, not the music, but anyhow, was it like an opera house in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and he came there to give his Christian show. In order to avoid the disgrace of barrenness, women gave their handmaidens to their husbands, regarding the children born under such circumstances as their own. Now Sarah, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. So she said, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go and sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarai had said. Now there's double trouble here. She's presenting the sins of the flesh, and he's agreeing to the sins of the flesh. All right, do you think that she did the right thing? Why or why not? Should Abram have listened to Sarai's suggestion? When Sarai knew that Hagar, was pregnant, Sarai, began to despise her, Hagar. I think I put in there the antecedents so you would know the references where it says she and her. The pregnancy of Hagar upset the harmony in the home. Well, of course. The blessing and harmony of Abraham's home was gone, not to be restored for some 16 or 17 years. Such is the fruit of impatience in the things of God. Now I might add to that, not just impatience, but trusting in the flesh, the sinful self. You're going to do it, not God. You're going to do it your way, not God's way. Her rebellion of offering Hagar manifested itself in a couple of ways. An untamed tongue, she blamed Abram, and an untamed temper. She vented her anger on Hagar. So if you have some of these problems, it's about rebellion. The tongue that just lashes out, and the temper. The tongue and the temper are connected to rebellion and sin. Now Ishmael is to be born to Hagar. And Ishmael will become the father of the Arabs. Isaac is the true son of Abraham and Sarah. Isaac becomes the father of the Jews. Now, this is the origin of great deal of tension that exists in the world. It goes all the way back to this story. Their rage, the descendants of Ishmael, against Israel keeps the world in turmoil, on the blink of global war. brink. Blink. Well, it could be a blink as well as a brink. It was all foreseen and wrapped up in that embryonic prophecy spoken to Hagar long ago, John Phillips. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age. Faith had a very important role in all of this. We're told in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 11. It was by faith she was barren that she conceived. So Abraham's 100 years of age at the birth of Isaac, and I believe Sarah is about 90 or 91. Abram's instructed to offer up Isaac in Genesis chapter 22. That's a whole Bible study in and of itself. Assuming that Sarah knew all about Abram's intention to go to Mount Moriah and offer Isaac as a sacrifice, what effect do you think this had on her? So not too much is ever brought out in the biblical text about the story of offering of Isaac on Mount Moriah, and then of course the goat being provided, the ram being provided. But what about Sarah? She's in the background. How much does she know, and what is she thinking? And is there same faith in her that was in Abraham? An old legend stated by Josephus says that when Abraham and Isaac returned from Mount Moriah, they found Sarah dying of a broken heart. The terrible ordeal had been too much for her. Now again, that is a legend. It's not Bible, not necessarily historical. But sometimes there can be truth found in legends. The Bible does not say exactly why she died, but she lived to be 127. She died at Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Abraham's love for his wife is clearly noticed in his grief. Abraham went to mourn for Sarah and weep over her. So Abraham will bury his wife in the cave of Machpelah, which is in Hebron in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave were deeded to Abraham by the Hittites as a burial site. Now this is very, very important because he's burying his wife in the land that God says he's going to give him, but he doesn't yet have the land. So it's a very important thing because this cave will become burial ground for the patriarchs. Sarah's cave is important because her tomb is a piece of real estate in Canaan that Abram actually possessed during his lifetime. Someday all the land would go to Abram's descendants, but only a tiny slice here of this burial plot. So you can read 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 to 7, and you'll see in there Sarah mentioned submission. What does this mean? It means for the man who's involved in the marriage, look out if you mention it. Nobody wants to hear about this today. Okay, so this is a little bit of sort of reflection on this idea of wives being submissive. Now, it's up for discussion, but nevertheless, it's in the Holy Scriptures. Not to be mistaken as some type of, you become a dictator. And then Paul mentions her in Galatians, and she represents the line of faith and freedom. I'm going to try to get through this because I only got 20 minutes on my video. Thank you for watching. This concludes the video. May God bless you, and may you have acquired some knowledge and strength and hope by the life of Sarah in the Old Testament. This concludes the video.